Good evening. Welcome to the Cleveland Heights University Heights City Schools Board Work Session for the 17th of August 2021. Mr. Gaynor, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Wright.
Here.
Mr. Posh. Mr. Hines.
Here.
Ms. Serini.
Here.
Ms. Lewis.
Here. I am sitting in Mr. Posh's seat as he is unavailable tonight. First on our agenda, we have the consent agenda, which is a grouping of personnel issues and business services issues. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I motion that we consider the consent agenda.
I second.
Is there any discussion? I would just like to note that one of the resolutions is to actually withdraw a bid for roofing work on the high school. The contract had been assigned to a company who has withdrawn its bid because they are unable to find sufficient labor and materials to do it on our schedule. So that will have to wait. Mr. Gaynor, if there's no other discussion, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Wright.
Yes.
Mr. Hines.
Yes.
Ms. Serini.
Yes.
Ms. Lewis.
Yes. Now we have a separate business services item which was added today, so we're going to consider that separately, and that is the approval of the resolution accepting the lowest responsible and responsive base bid of All Ways Construction for the Milliken Driveway Improvement Project. Mr. Gaynor, can you explain that to us, please?
Actually, I'm going to ask if Mr. Petcack, who is on the call, wants to jump in and speak to that.
Even better.
You hear me? So, first off, I apologize for throwing this on this last minute agenda. GPD was able to get this bid out. We just opened bids today, and after discussions with the proposed awardee, if we started late, which would have been in September, with the amount of work that we're looking at having done, there was a chance of getting into bad weather in October that asphalt could become difficult. We don't know the future, so I asked the superintendent and Mr. Gaynor if I could approach Ms. Lewis. I did, and that's all we have on the agenda tonight. Our attorney drafted the resolution, and it's in front of you.
Could you give us a quick summary of the work that is going to happen at the Milliken Driveway?
Sure. So this is, and I want to say it was about 3 years ago, maybe longer, we had the main piece of the parking lot where the grounds and trades park their vehicles. That was accomplished. At the time, we couldn't afford to do the rest of it. So what this does is catch us up to what we wanted to do back then. So the drive that enters off of Crest Road, of Severn, is a private drive that enters in. That's going to start there. It's going to come around to the right where we have the semi trucks that deliver paper. They drop it off at that building. So we need to fix the driveway all the way up to the building. That's the main part. The alternates included fixing a couple potholes that we had outside of that area. And then we included the driveway that goes from the point when you enter the property back to the Severn barn. That's currently gravel. They're going to take that, level it off, reinforce it with additional gravel and compact it. And then the other alternate was for if you were back at the barn, there's a area within the confines of the building itself, just like it's like a U shape, but within the U, we're going to turn it into concrete and have proper drainage in there. When we get into driving and because we store all of our winter equipment there and we store all of our summer equipment there. So we do require access in and out of there. And if it's muddy or in a mess, we get into trouble back there.
Thank you.
So, George, if you don't mind me asking, am I correct in assuming that the the general footprint, if you will, of the paved area or the area that will be paved is roughly the same size as it currently exists today? Obviously, we may be changing surfaces, but the square footage will remain the same. Am I right on that?
Yes, definitely. Again, there was as you enter the parking lot there and took a right, that was never accomplished under the last project. It was because of cost. So it's been deteriorating ever since, and we're at a point where we need to fix it. If we're going to stay there, we need to fix it.
Now, the path going back to the stables is also used by community members who walk in the woods. Having that be re-graveled will make it more pleasant for their use as well as better for our vehicle use. Is that correct?
Right. None of the property is actually fenced off. We do have a fence and a gate across the entrance. That's just to keep, we used to have people drive in there and dispose of their garbage in our dumpsters. So the gate just stops that, but the rest of the property does not have any fence around it. So yeah, you're right, Molly, people can walk freely down that path to the Severn Barn and go where they please.
Any other comments or questions about this resolution?
Just that, I really, as we all know, Milliken is a very important facility to the district, housing all of our skilled trades and providing a place for us to do bulk purchases of materials that the district will need. It provides us an opportunity to have a place for that, and as well as the important function that it serves in the stables of being a place where we can service and store many of our large pieces of equipment. It is also a wonderful community asset in that neighborhood. It is a rare piece of beautiful forested land, pretty much surrounded by development. And so it's a little island that I know is critically important to the local community there. The Severance Stables, is a historic structure also. Those are not built like that anymore. And, I know that we all take our stewardship of that structure as well as the school building very, very seriously. So I support this resolution because it will help to maintain the property and make the facility, the overall property, more pleasant for the community.
George, I have a question. Is this a dangerous driveway right now? You mentioned potholes, you've mentioned the conditions deteriorating. Is it creating a dangerous situation?
It depends we have city streets that are worse. But it's been deteriorating. When I say deteriorating, we have potholes, we have the asphalt's crumbling and falling apart. It's not a danger to our vehicles unless you drive it, unless you're walking and you step in one and twist your ankle. But our trucks are just bouncing up and down going into it. And going back to the barn, you do get a little, especially in our trucks with mediocre suspension, you're hitting your head sometimes on the ceiling of the truck. And I meant to mention, if I can, the architects, anytime we go out to bid on a project, they come up and they get estimates of what they think the work will cost based on current conditions and work that goes on around us. So this project was estimated at $305,000, just the base, not counting the estimates. So we're $40,000 below with the alternates included. So we're really extremely pleased with Always coming in and giving us a great price.
So what I'm hearing is that it may not necessarily be dangerous, but it is creating additional wear and tear on our equipment And I don't know, somebody bumping their head, to me, sounds like that could potentially be a dangerous issue.
This is I mean, as far as parking lots go, you know, we have parking lots on a plan that we try to maintain. This is one that was supposed to be done 3 or 4 years ago, and we just delayed it, waiting to know if the board had any inkling at all of disposing of the property. We didn't want to put any money into it. So once I got the go-ahead, we developed the plans and are going to finish the work off.
Thank you.
So we're getting more work done for less money than we expected. And we are making sure that we can continue to use the facility to save the district money by having proper access to the loading dock when we get deliveries in a semi. I don't think there's any downside to this. Thank you. Mr. Gaynor, will you call the roll, please?
We need
I'm sorry?
we need a motion on that.
Oh, my mistake. May I have a motion to approve this lowest responsible and responsive bid for the Milliken driveway work?
Motion.
Second.
Any more discussion? Okay. Mr. Gaynor, could you please call the roll now?
Mr. Hines,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Ms. Serini,
Yes.
Ms. Wright.
Yes.
We have approved the financial reports, which you gave us, Mr. Gaynor, and they represent the first month of the fiscal year.
They are, you know, oddly, and I'm not sure why Board Docs is showing this, but it actually had that Milliken resolution as part of consent in the financial reports as a separate action. So I pulled the Milliken bid out. We just did a separate action on that, but the finance is still still showing as a separate action item.
Okay, so let's look at these financial reports then. Thank you.
There we go.
Scott, can you get closer to the microphone? It's hard to hear you.
Sure.
Thank you.
So we have the monthly financial statements here for July. You're absolutely right. This is the first of the fiscal year, so there's not a whole lot of activity here to report, but it's in the same format that you're used to seeing. We have your fund summary. You'll see the history for general fund ending cash balances. Everything's tracking more or less as we would expect it to in the first month. And the general fund budget summary, where you can see the current budget and then the amount of money spent so far. Again, very little activity first month of the fiscal year. Anything that you see that looks a little high, for example, under business services, you see a pretty high percent expended. That's just encumbered purchase orders for the fiscal year. So if you see, higher numbers, more than what one would expect in a single month, that would be at the beginning of the fiscal year. Everyone tries to encumber their purchase orders so that they have a purchase order in place before they do the activity that they need to pay for.
So that's why business operations is showing 97%
Correct.
encumbered. Got it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Everybody else is tracking much lower because we're early in the process.
Yeah. Yeah. No, business services, and in turn, a lot of the business services budget is utilities, those kinds of things. So they'll actually put a purchase order in place for the full fiscal year, but that happens in the first month of the year. So that's why that looks a little high compared to some of the others.
And I assume something similar happens with student services as well?
Correct. In particular, tuition, they'll put their purchase orders in place for tuition for the full year for other districts.
Okay, thank you.
So then we just have our monthly revenue expenditure comparison. And then some commentary on the monthly financial summary. I won't go through all that. We just note some of the individual statistics. We did note the bond refunding that we did, which is nearly complete and will wrap up in September. And then the final note there is just a little bit about House Bill 110, the fact that we don't have the 5-year forecast in the monthly financials for this month as we typically would, because we're still going through the process of trying to wrap our arms around what what the new Fair School funding plan, or House Bill 110 in particular, looks like. I know Thursday, I have, I think it's session 4 of 5 that OASBO's putting on the new House bill and on the Fair School funding plan, and they've kind of broken it out into the individual components and had a separate session on each one because there's so much to it. We had an all-day budget analysis and discussion seminar that I know Ms. Serini and I both attended virtually, which was long, informative, and a little depressing. I think you texted me right at the end of that because, but the good thing about it was, Aaron Roush, who is the Director of Budget with the Ohio Department of Education, was one of the speakers at that. He did promise that in October they would have everything, all the individual components in our foundation payment. We would be able to see with full transparency every calculation and how they came up with everything. So that was good, and he did say that if they could do anything sooner than that, they certainly would. But just some of the conversation in terms of what the future might look past this biennium was a little bleak, I think, in terms of what we saw. So that's it for the monthly financials. Again, we will have a 5-year forecast in September, as I think we do want to at least start to put some of what we know in there. And that would be, for example, the direct funding of vouchers is out. Our state funding is reduced down to the net amount. We at least know that. And anything else that we might come to know between now and then, we'll have a forecast in the September financials for it.
Could you go back, please, to the previous bullet and just explain once more what is happening with having refunded our bond debt?
Yes. So you recall that Michelle Hillstrom came and presented to the board at our last meeting to discuss the fact that we took advantage of improved interest rates, refunded all the remaining bond debt for the high school project and the middle schools, and ended up ultimately saving the district about or the taxpayers, I should say, the community, about $18.5 million over the life of those bonds. So that was both a combination of outstanding general obligation bonds that will be impacted by the millage that we need to collect to pay those bonds, but also it was the COPS debt instrument, which was being paid out of permanent improvement funds. So the fact that we were able to reduce the interest rate on that freed up a little extra money in the PI fund that will give Mr. Petcack, some additional money to do some permanent improvement projects with. So, yeah, that was a long process, but it's just about wrapped up. I have closing documents that just came by courier today that the board president will have to sign along with some other signatures, and then the money gets transferred over, and we are done.
So the summary in lay terms is we will have more money available in our permanent improvement fund to work on our buildings.
Correct.
And we will not be collecting as much money from the taxpayers through real estate taxes as we had expected to for the construction projects.
Correct.
So we're saving the taxpayers, what was it you told us, about $1 million a year for 13 years?
Yes. So we front-loaded the savings, so that should translate to the taxpayers and roughly $1 million less that we will collect for the bond debt. Yes.
And so just also to remind taxpayers, a mill is a formal unit of measure that is used in tax talk. And roughly put, a mill is equivalent to $1 per $1,000 of the tax assessed value of one's home. So this information is easily attained through the auditor's website. You can look at the auditor's website for the millage being taxed on your individual homes and get a pretty good sense of what you can expect come January. And
So that-
again, the taxable value of your home is not as high as what the market value of your home is. The taxable value of your home, I think, is usually around 65% of what they say is.
35.
It's
35, sorry, I knew that there was, sorry.
Yep.
Okay.
Right, you're taxed on 35% of the
Yes.
assessed value. Yeah.
So,
Yep.
this is really significant. I have to say, as you know, I wasn't here. I was on vacation with my family for the last meeting, and so I watched the meeting online afterwards, and that was just, to me, such an exciting revelation that Scott and his department saw this opportunity, presented the opportunity to the board, and then went out and grabbed it. And this is simply fantastic that our taxpayers, who trusted us with a significant voluntary tax increase to make these wonderful renovations to our buildings, and then we're able to return that trust by stewarding that debt as well as we are. So again, just bravo for that great work, Scott.
Scott, in your general fund budget summary, could you explain or just clarify for me the encumbered and then the expanded encumbered? That's in your graph.
I'm sorry, Beverly, that you wanted an explanation of the encumbered amount and what else?
Pardon me.
So for example, if we look at was there a particular line item you wanted to see?
We can go to salary. We can go at the top on salary and rate.
Okay.
Wages, yeah.
Sure. So salaries and wages. So, part of our temporary appropriations, and we'll be coming back to you next month to have you approve permanent appropriations. Mm-hmm. Temporary appropriations, we have $59,738,90. So far, year to date, in the month of July, we spent $7.2 million. Mm-hmm. So the percentage expended would be about 12%. Encumbrances would be any purchase orders that we would have in place that are legally committed, so you have to deduct that from what your budget is available, because you have to have a purchase order in place before you actually would spend the money. So under a salary and wages item, that's likely mostly substitute costs that there are purchase orders in place for. So then that brings you down to what you have, the percent expended and encumbered, and then your remaining balance after that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So really, if someone were to want to know how much money was available, it's that far right column, the ending balance.
Okay.
If some of those encumbrances don't end up being spent, that would increase your ending balance and give you more money.
So I'd like to thank you once more for refinancing our bond debt and saving us all a lot of money. I am very grateful.
Well, I appreciate the board giving us the latitude to do that. So that was, we definitely.
Now, would you like us to vote to approve the financial reports as a separate item?
Yes, please.
Okay, may I have a motion, please?
I motion that we approve the financial reports as offered.
I second.
Mr. Gaynor, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Serini,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis,
Yes.
Ms. Wright,
Yes.
Mr. Hines.
Yes.
And now I'd like to turn things over to Superintendent Kirby.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. All right. This evening, I do have two presentations for our work session. They are connected, though. The first is we will be presenting the 2025 strategic plan, and then following that, we will be presenting information about our ESSER planning process feedback and some initial plans for ESSER dollars. If you recall, let me share my screen. So it was In March, during our March work session, we prepared our draft and shared the draft of the strategic plan. In this session, we're coming back and we're sharing more specific information about metrics, measures that matter, and monitoring the progress of the strategic plan. So those are our presentation goals, to share those metrics. We'll also be sharing year one department plans. So each of our departments looked at the 5-year plan and identified the action steps that they would be engaging in aligned to that plan. So joining me tonight to present this work session will be all the members of the cabinet that are listed here. And just to make sure that board members and our wider audience are aware, we know that we use a lot of edu-speak in our presentations. And so we really wanted to make sure that we captured some of the terms that you'll see, that just in terms of being efficient with this space, that we use these acronyms. But here we see those spelled out, and in many instances, links to more information about those specific terms that we'll be talking about this evening. And again, just to revisit our planning timeline, we shared the bulk of this during our March work session. So the bottom 4 is going to be the focus of our work this evening. So we developed data targets over the course of July and August this summer as we were waiting for our data to come back both from this school year. We also looked at implementation and outcome indicators. So what are the ways that we're measuring our work each year so that we can accomplish our goals? We identified some initial tools to help track progress on the strategic plan. We developed measures that matter. Now, if in the March work session we shared the general areas, for this work session we're coming back with some hard numbers under measures that matter. And then finally, the last piece of this is at the regular board meeting in September, when we will have all of our members present, we will be asking the board for formal approval of this plan. Again, just to reiterate, we do have a very diverse and broad committee of stakeholders across the district who have been helping in this effort. We also have engaged through focus group and surveys about 2,300 members of the wider community, but also along the way have been receiving feedback on this plan from our principals and schools, different leadership teams as well, kind of using the planning and the themes coming out of their work to inform this as well. So our new mission for the 2025 plan, our schools will provide a challenging and engaging education to prepare all of our students to become responsible citizens and succeed in college and career. So we want our students to be well-rounded, responsible, engaged citizens, and successful in college and career. The vision for the Cleveland Heights University High School District is to educate students by embracing diversity, ensuring equitable experiences, and fostering outstanding teaching and learning to develop academically prepared, critical thinkers who contribute positively and compete successfully in the world. And supporting the mission and vision in our work are the core values of excellence, equity, integrity, trust, and respect. So these are kind of some of the key components of that undergird the plan for 2025. Mission, vision, and core values. And again, this is a repeat from what we discussed in March. So the components of the plan are goals, objectives, strategies, and action steps. This evening, we're just going to focus on goals and objectives, and we're going to share the year one action steps from each of the departments. So we went through and shared more at the last meeting, but we wanted to kind of give you a sense of the work this year again. So before we start, I really want to take some time and kind of walk through our key data targets. One thing that we really wanted to do in this plan is to really identify some aspirational goals for the students in our district. The big target in the 2020 plan was graduation rate. So the goal was a 90% graduation rate for students in our high school. We got to 89.6, so when you round up, we reached that metric. For 2025, we wanted to add metrics that really represent the pathway that students are taking from pre-K through high school graduation. So you'll see, for example, the first big key data target, and I'm very excited about this. We believe that 100% of our third graders in 5 years can be reading at or above their identified grade level. The only reason why we have the term identified grade level is because we know that some of our third grade students are going to have some different goals based on their IEPs if they have IEPs. And we are confident that 100% of our students who have IEPs are going to reach those goals too. So we will be really organizing our work, and a lot of this does involve a really key focus on our early childhood programming, the work happening in our kindergarten classrooms and first and second grade classrooms, so we can get there in 5 years. As we go up the academic continuum, here's where we talk about the performance of students in grades K to 12. So 80%, our goal here, 80% of our students will show proficiency on our state assessments. Ninth grade algebra is a very big gatekeeper for students and really connects to students being able to graduate and be successful post-high school. Our goal is that 90% of our ninth grade students have course success in algebra. We know that the work that our teachers are doing is the best measure of students' academic performance. We've been doing lots of work around this and are really showing great progress in ninth grade success in algebra. Target in 5 years is 90% of our ninth graders to get there. We raised the bar on our high school graduation rate goal, our 4-year goal, to 95% of students graduating in 4 years. And then finally, we added a target of students and their performance after high school, so the steps they take directly after high school. So our goal is that 90% of our students will pursue college or a viable career pathway. So by college, that's 2-year college, 4-year college, can be a post-secondary certificate program. So this really ties our focus work around college enrollment and our focus work around our career and technical education programs and raises the bar for all of our students there to reach that goal in 5 years. So for the next component of the presentation, each member of the cabinet is going to walk through their goals, their objectives, their year 1 action plans, and then the measures that matter for their identified and assigned area. So I'm going to first turn it over to our Assistant Superintendent, Mrs. Felicia Gould, to take us through Goal 1.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Wonderful. It seems like yesterday we just started with our strategic plan, and now we're beginning our 2025 strategic plan. And to support the key data targets that Superintendent Kirby has shared with us, we'll start with Goal 1, which is about our student outcomes, expectations, proficiency, and mastery. So Goal 1, it really speaks to looking at our students and our graduates being ready to succeed in college and career. Up under this particular goal, there are 2 strategic objectives. Objective 1 focuses in basically on students exceeding their high school credit requirements, as well as their post-secondary success and readiness for graduation. And then we'll also look at evidence-based instructional strategies and having that students being able to access their grade level expectations. So with that, as we look at the action steps to support those 2 objectives, we're looking at our core materials to make sure that we are providing that high quality instruction at what we call the universal tier, where all students are being able to access that information. We'll look at some common grading practices in order for our students to understand the components of mastery. We will provide our parents with tools and resources to also be able to support their students with the learning that is taking place within our classrooms. We'll take a look at our retention policies and supports that we need for students in those transition grades, and those transition grades being those students who will be coming from pre-K to kindergarten, 5th grade to 6th grade, 8th grade to 9th grade, and then also 12th grade to college. We'll make sure that we have fidelity within our multi-tier systems of support. And when we talk about our multi-tier systems of support, we're talking about our universal layer. Our second layer would be those students that we're really targeting for some more support. And then at the third layer, we'd be talking about students with that intensive. We want to look at developing a 5-year CTE strategic plan. We'll look at our building level action plan across our district to make sure that all of the plans are aligned to meet the needs that we have spelled out in our strategic plan. We will look at adjusting our assessment cycle to better align to the students' needs. We'll look at how we're looking at pacing and making sure that those assessment matches so that we are really showing mastery. This year, we will be implementing a new evaluation system for teachers that looks more on the data that they use to provide how their lessons will take place and really showing how students are progressing. And then we will always use our National Clearinghouse data to track our 2- and 4-year college enrollment and persistence. So this helps us to make sure that we have students that are ready to succeed in college and career with these action steps. To take a look at the measures that matter, here are some measures that matter that we definitely want to look at under Goal 1. 100% of our students in our IB, STEM, and AVID programs, maintaining that particular certification. 5% annual increase in students participating in our extracurricular activities. 97% attendance rate. 80% of our students at or above level on what we call NWEA, which is our MAP core assessments. 5% annual increase in AP, advanced placement performance for our students. 10% annual increase in the honors diplomas, 5% annual increase in industry certifications for all of our CTE courses, and 5% annual increase in our web exam passage rate for our CTE courses. 10% annual increase in the number of students with a grade point average of 3.0 or higher, and a 5% annual increase in students earning college credits in high school. And now that concludes Goal 1, and we will move into Strategic Plan Goal 2, and Bob Swagger, the Director of Curriculum and Instruction, will walk us through that.
Good evening, everybody. Are you able to hear me clearly? Perfect, thank you. So as we think about Goal 2 within the strategic plan, we really are thinking about our educational approach, especially as it relates to equity. So as we continue to think about equity, you'll see in the coming slides that equity really is our focus as we are providing those opportunities and empowerment to students. So when we think about our Goal 2, excellent education is provided to each student in every district, school, and classroom. And you'll see that there are 6 objectives listed underneath Goal 2. Really, again, focusing that idea on equity, you can see that we want to make sure we close the achievement gaps for all students and really make sure that we are eliminating the predictability of academic achievement that's based upon a student grouping of class, race, gender, or disability. Our second objective is to make sure that we have all of our staff are demonstrating high expectation for students, both inside and outside of the classroom, and making sure that we are really contributing to that learning culture. Our third objective does talk about ensuring equity of education and excellence for all learners. And I think that really speaks to the work that we're doing, whether you're talking about the history of marginalization, and you'll see some of those metrics come in on that next slide. We also want to make sure that the technological resources are there, and our teachers have access to those tools to make sure that we can use those tools in order to close gaps. We also see that students will meet or exceed defined academic benchmarks, and I think that that speaks very loud to the goals that Superintendent Kirby has outlined at the beginning of the presentation, even with that goal of 100% of our third graders. Our last objective is making that early learning education a foundation for future academic success. And right now we know we have expanded our pre-K task force to really think about what does birth to 5-year-old instruction and education look like at home. So as we move into some of those metrics, we can see how these will really play out with our action steps. I'm sorry, go ahead. You can go back one slide. There it is. I'm sorry. Thank you, Superintendent Kirby. So when we think about those action steps, we're talking about co-teaching, co-serving, and co-planning. And that really relates to students that have been identified with a disability and thinking about where it is that they are receiving instruction. So we know that the continuum of instruction is really important, and we want to make sure that the resources are in place for all students to have success. There's a big initiative in the district right now around PBIS teams, really thinking about how we contribute to that positive culture and climate. And we need to provide teams at the buildings with professional development and implementation support. We do know that the discipline task force meetings have helped us think about the time and frequency that students are being disciplined in our district. And we know that out of that task force, we will continue to have strong recommendations for how to improve and help our students meet their academic outcomes. The fourth action step talks about the history of marginalization, and that has been a key foundational piece of our district equity work. And so that work will continue as we think about other topics like implicit bias and how we're using what we know about ourselves to actually instruct students. Our building leadership team will continue to review academic data and help buildings provide a plan on how to address the varying student needs. And we've had a couple of retreats with our building leaders and our building leadership team, and we'll continue that work with the district leadership team throughout the school year. The sixth recommendation or action step is to develop that portrait of a graduate. And I know I sat here presenting to the board about the College and Career Task Force. And I know that the portrait of a graduate was some of the key work that we talked about within that task force. So we want to see that embedded as we continue to move forward. We know that technology is going to continue to evolve. Our last year has had a very steep learning curve for all of our instructional staff, but we know that the resources continue to evolve even as we are preparing for this school year. And we want to make sure that by 2025, we are going to continue on that trend so our technology effectively supports instruction. Part of that gets right back into our action step for Tier 1. And Tier 1 is a universal tier, which means that all students are having access to high quality instructional strategies, and that our Tier 1 should produce student learning at a pretty high rate. And that's going to be pivotal when we start thinking about accomplishing some of those goals. You did hear me talk about that implement the early learning task force, and that's specifically there to align and support our key stakeholders for early learning and really make sure we're implementing best practices when it comes to that birth to 5 grade level or age level. So when we think about our measures that matter for goal 2, it really is still focused on the equity. So 100% of schools would show fidelity in the MTSS, which is the multi-tiered systems of support implementation. And there are readiness exams or readiness surveys that help us know a fidelity check for how we are doing with our implementation. We do have 100% of our schools effectively implement a PBIS program. And again, we have some of those tiered programs that allow us to see how we're checking in with our PBIS implementation. We want 100% of our indicators met on our special education report card. And I know that Ms. Liddell Anderson is also here on the call and could even expound on that if there's some additional questions on the special education report card. We want a 5% increase on impactful community partnerships because we know how critical they are to having successful schools is to partner. 100% of equity policy elements are implemented with fidelity. That continues to be our equity work, especially around training and providing opportunities for staff to learn about our equity policy. And 100% of our preschools would receive a 5-star rating. And at this point in time, we do have 5-star ratings from our preschool programs, our existing preschool programs. And so we want to make sure that we continue that trend as we move into the next phase of the strategic plan. There's 85% of high school students we want enrolled in an AP, CTE, or a college credit plus course by 2025. So again, we know that that's a lofty goal, but as students take the next step in their life beyond high school, those are the options. We can think about either career or we can think about college. And so we want to make sure that becomes accessible. This 25% decrease in achievement gap in core classes is directly related to our equity policy and thinking about how are we consciously making decisions in our district to make sure students are not predetermined based on their gender or their race. So we want to make sure we're continuing to close those achievement gaps. And then 100% of our graduates have a viable post-secondary plan. And that is definitely a component to make sure that they will have success beyond high school. And now as we move into strategic plan goal 3, I will turn it over to Kathan Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Swaggart. Good evening, board members. So under strategic plan goal 3, we are focused on family and community engagement, partnerships, and communication. So under Audit, this goal entails, we are making sure that families and community partners are welcomed and fully engaged in supporting and enhancing student learning. So we have 5 main objectives under this goal, starting with fostering staff and family relationships that support student learning. We know that family involvement in student learning and two-way communication between staff, support staff, teaching staff, and families will help students achieve leaps and bounds. The data has shown that over and over again. So that's why that's strategic objective 1. Moving on to 2, optimizing the use of the community's assets and expertise to provide community learning centers for students and improving district results. So completing the implementation of the post-secondary planning system as a tool for maximizing the use of those community partnerships. So we've got 2 things here on the CLC, which is piloting at Noble this year. And we've also got the post-secondary planning system, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well, but that serves as a cloud-based tool for tracking student data and seeing where students stand and how they're progressing and how we can get the community resources we have involved in a way that can help leverage that achievement. Number 3, improving communication with and among our families, school leaders and teachers and community partners. Number 4, improving public perception of CHUH schools among stakeholders. So that goes beyond just our internal, kind of our inner circle with our families and staff. We want to improve that public perception among the broader community as well. And number 5, fostering a solid understanding of the district's equity initiatives among internal and external stakeholders. Equity is obviously a huge component in our district and our strategic plan, but it will only go so far unless everyone understands what the goals are and we're all on the same page with equity. So the action steps for this coming year, we want to ensure that the building leadership teams establish their family engagement and equity strategies that really build partnerships with their families in order to help achieve those building level action plan goals. They're all tied together. As I mentioned before, we are launching the pilot community learning center at Noble Elementary School during this coming school year. The team there is also working on developing a community needs assessment for the broader Noble community. supporting the building level action plans and the national network of partnership school goals around improving attendance, identifying additional community partnerships needed to meet community and student and family needs, retraining our counselors and social workers on the use of the post-secondary planning system. So as I mentioned, that is our big tool that the counselors and social workers will use to track where students are, and getting those counselors and social workers retrained on the use of it will be really important in the coming year. And finally, completing family, staff, and student surveys, generating reports to track student progress data. So getting a baseline of where our families and staff and students are, and figuring out how we can improve different components moving forward. So continuing on with the action steps, we will continue to publicize information on college and career opportunities. So those can be fairs and scholarship opportunities, seminars for parents and students, workshops and things of that nature. We are working on doing a communications audit for the district with the help of the National School Public Relations Association. So that is coming soon. The ball is rolling on that. We are also developing a district-wide communications plan that will also be informed by the audit. We're looking to re-engage KinderNet, which is a parent group in the district that helps welcome new families, especially those families with early childhood, preschool and kindergarten students, get acclimated to the district, answer questions, tour buildings, and things like that. Engaging in a student retention plan with a group called KSO K through 12, engaging student voices in amplifying the work happening in the district. So for instance, working with the CTE, the video students, on videos and social media components that they can help with and telling their own story, because that was one of the themes that emerged from the strategic planning work. And finally, launching our equity webpage to help tell the community what we're doing in terms of equity and the strides that we're making. So in terms of the measures that matter with Goal 3, we're shooting for 90% parent engagement on Infinite Campus and other school platforms. So we want to make sure that at least 90%, if not more, of parents are signed up for Infinite Campus. A 5% increase in satisfaction with the students' experience on the annual parent survey. That was that baseline that I mentioned that we're looking to determine. 100% of schools have active parent groups. 100% of schools have community partnerships to support their student goals. And 90% of stakeholders are satisfied with the district and school communication. Next is Strategic Plan Goal 4, and I will turn it over to Dr. Paul Lombardo.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for having us. Strategic Plan Goal 4, as you can see, we look at our professionals and a culture of excellence, caring quality, and diverse collaboration. So we always want to make sure we attract and retain caring, high qualified staff with diverse experiences and backgrounds who work collaboratively. As we look at our two strategic objectives, the first one is a large objective: increase and promote the hiring of staff that represent the cultural makeup of CHUH student body, and develop and retain faculty and staff who put students at the center of learning and contribute to a collaborative culture that promotes their intellectual and personal growth. And our second strategy is to provide a safe and secure environment that is conducive to learning and is consistent with the educational goals of this district, while building community partners that foster trust, mutual respect, and cooperation. So as we look at our action steps, you may recall we did receive a grant a couple years ago called Grow Your Own. That's what the GYO is. We want to get feedback from our past participants on their experience which receiving a scholarship, going to CSU, and getting a teaching or an education certificate. So we do want to get their expertise and their opinions about the program. We want to develop a website and newsletter to promote a Grow Your Own, share experiences about the program. We want to continue to get this out in our communication throughout the year. We want to develop promotional materials because we did receive the second grant, diversifying the educational profession for $70,000 for the next couple years. So we want to promote the Grow Your Own and get more and more of our staff involved in this program for the scholarships. We want to research top affinity employee resource programs for educators of color, and our affinity groups are groups of employees with similar backgrounds, interests, or demographic factors, such as gender, ethnicity, and oftentimes employers use these to help create a diverse and inclusive work environment. So we're gonna research that and move into that. We want to interview experts to aid us in the development of those affinity employee resource groups. We want to incorporate equity task force training into PD planning. We want to implement inclusive interview and hiring techniques and tools. We've already started to do it for this incoming year. We want to make sure that at least one member of the interview team will be trained in equity practices from our equity task force to ensure hiring practices. And as we move through the next couple of years, we want more and more of our hiring teams to be trained in those equity practices. And we want to review and revise as needed district safety practices and protocols. As we look at our measures that matter, we want to have at least a 5% annual increase in certified staff diversity, 90% retention of all staff yearly. You may say, why don't we get 100%? Well, there are some factors that are beyond our control, such as people retiring or those that go on leave of absence. So we do want to shoot for a 90%. We do want to get 100% of our Grow Your Own participants to earn their certificate. We're really making a commitment to our classified staff who want to become educators. And a 5% increase in effective school rating, and I think Liz was going to talk a little bit more about this measure that matters.
There is my mic. One particular piece under measures that matter, which is important, is that we have a platform where we can collect survey data that shows impact, because there are some elements of this work which really are about how students feel in terms of being engaged and supported. Same for teachers, same for principals, parent satisfaction, and overall feelings around safety. And so we've been looking at it and researching some tools that we'll need to further research and pilot this year to see if they're going to give us that qualitative data to show how we're growing in these areas. And if, many of these measures that matter, those more soft targets if we're making progress. So you would find that specifically as it relates to things like teacher retention. Not only will we look at the numbers, but how are teachers feeling about their experience? Do they feel like they are impactful as a group in supporting students? Do they feel adequately supported at the building and district level as well? Same for principals and other staff as well. So that's what that is really a reference to. One piece of feedback we received last year is that although people appreciated the survey feedback, by the end of the year they were overwhelmed with the survey feedback. So we do want to streamline it, make it research-based, and make it something that's going to help us know how we're progressing there. So we can move now to goal 5. So I'll turn that over to George. Thank you, Dr. George Pekak.
Good evening again. Strategic goal 5 addresses operational resources, finance, technology, and facilities. So we want to make sure that our district has the necessary infrastructure to provide an outstanding 21st century education and keep the community well informed about how our resources are being used for school and our students' performance. Next slide. So we have 5 strategic objectives. Objective 1 is district facilities will support the educational objectives and will provide equitable, safe, and comfortable environments at 100% approval rate. We have spent an awful lot of money on 3 of our facilities, and we want to make sure that those facilities, along with the ones that the older facilities that we maintain them, 100% may be reaching for the sky, but we are going to do our best to get that approval rate. Strategic objective 2, our infrastructure and technology equipment will support effective operations and maximize learning. Number 3 is inform, educate all stakeholders regarding district finances and school funding in Ohio. Mr. Gaynor will talk more about that in a bit. Objective 4 is improve allocations of resources for equity. And strategic objective 5, expand advocacy efforts related to school funding. So some of these action steps, I'm going to read through these. Number 1, discuss district facilities with district staff to review current 5-year plan. This is really important because we have some, as I've said numerous times before, we have very talented staff. We have trades and grounds and custodians and cleaners. We have people that know our facilities, and we want and value their input. So the strategic plan will be discussed with them and see if we're on the right track. We're going to share the current year's projects with the Lake Facility Committee for input. We currently do that, and I keep them updated. It's quarterly now. Interview architects and consultants to determine which firm can support the district and specific project needs. I do this typically yearly. I'll go out and ask for input from architects and consultants and see what they can bring to the district in support of our objectives. And then from that, we'll award the architects and consultants projects and ensure funds are available by early fall. We need to do that so that we can get out to bid in early spring for projects that could be completed in summertime. So we'll have project documents reviewed and out for public bid by late March, early April. That's the plan. We'll develop a master's facility plan that evaluates the school's district facilities using data and a lens on equity across our entire district. That's going to be a very important step for us this year. Complete transition of work orders from maintenance and preventive maintenance district to asset essentials. And we are in the very end of that right now. All the schools have transitioned. We've sent out information to teachers of the new program. It's still housed under School Dude, which is the company out of North Carolina that runs the Maintenance Direct platform. We're transitioning to a more robust software that incorporates the reactive maintenance with the preventive maintenance. So we feel we're going to get better reporting out of that also. We're going to set expectations and goals for all operations staff related to preventive maintenance work orders and general work orders. And we're going to complete the work orders within the established expectations. So we expect a response to work orders every day. So when one comes in, it is the custodian's responsibility at each facility to manage that work. And then they are responsible for assigning it out if they can't get it complete. So they'll sign it out to the grounds, to trades. If they need a contractor involvement, that'll come through the business office. Life cycle planning for infrastructure equipment and instructional equipment, including a network operations center upgrade. We're looking at the Delisle Center that has been needing an upgrade actually for well over 10 years. Identify resources and a budget to develop a cybersecurity plan and implement cybersecurity measures, including user education. And I believe Mr. Gaynor will take over from here.
All right, thanks, George. So on the next slide, you'll see some additional action steps we have under goal number 5. In particular, we have that we will create and distribute additional finance print material in consultation with the Lay Finance Committee. That could be a popular annual financial report. It could be something else. So just in that effort to make sure that people feel communicated with and understand school finance, school funding, and the position of the district. Number 2, work with IT and the communications department to increase finance data available on the district website in consultation again with the Lay Finance Committee. So we've spoken previously about wanting to have a dashboard on the website with again data that the community would find useful information. So again, we're going to start that process to look at what that might look like. Number 3, develop plan to maximize and monitor the use of ESSER funds to both provide additional supports necessary for student success as well as to improve the long-term fiscal position of the district. So that process is underway. I know Superintendent's going to speak about that after this presentation, and that's something that will be ongoing and monitored and reevaluated because that money is spent all the way through the fall of 2024. And number 4, engage with stakeholders on legislation that could impact the mission of the district by providing feedback testimony to legislators, as we have been doing, but to continue to do that, communicating the impact to various stakeholders, in particular the community, and working collaboratively with state and local organizations' advocacy efforts. So OASBO, OSBA, BASA, and the first ring groups. So the next slide shows that, our measurements that matter for goal number 5. In particular, what we're looking at right now would be that the master facilities plan has been implemented and that we know what we're doing with our facilities, that the district would maintain a strong fiscal position as measured by the 5-year forecast, that the district utilizes resources efficiently aligned to the strategic plan and our equity policies, and that the community is informed of the district fiscal picture. And with that, I'll turn it over to Liz.
So in these last 2 slides, we talk about the structures we'll have in place to monitor our strategic plan. So there are 5 different arms of the monitoring process. The first are quarterly department action plan meetings that we will engage in, where each department will be sharing the progress that they're making on their year action plans and making any kind of adjustments in strategy as necessary based on those plans that were just presented. So every quarter, the team will be coming together to look at that progress. The second arm is through quarterly principal meetings. That will also be an opportunity to really look at the progress making on the academic data. In those meetings, we look at attendance, assessment performance, we look at parent engagement, and other academic measures to see how the impact that we're having on student learning in all of our buildings. We'll also provide board members a quarterly board update aligned to our strategic plan so you can see how we're progressing in our 5-year plan, but really in those year 1 action plans as well, so you can see how those metrics are moving. We will provide an annual report to the community on the progress we're making of our strategic plan each year, so the community also has a strong awareness of where we are landing with that. And then the final piece is we are going to have a strategic plan dashboard where we will mount our strategic plan, our objectives, and show the progress we're making against those goals. This slide here just gives you a sample of what this will look like. And so here we've placed 2 of the current goals that we have in the 2025 plan. So you'll see the overarching goal around excellent education, goal 2 for every student in the district. We've placed in there the first objective, closing the achievement gap while eliminating the predictability of academic achievement. Now I just put in some numbers here just for an example. These aren't real numbers. And then under that, some of the strategies, the associated strategies connected to those objectives. And again, that's something that numerically we'll be able to know what percentage of completion we are for those particular strategies to meet those goals. This dashboard also will be housing those big, broad goals that I shared, as well as some of those measures that matter that can attach there too as well. This way, the public will be able to see the progress that we're making. Board members, any stakeholder can see against that 5-year plan how we're moving against those indicators too. So that's what one of the dashboard views looks like. And so with that, we have concluded this component of the presentation. I think we probably should pause for questions first here before going on to ESSER, just because, I know it's a lot.
Oh, yeah. Whoops, there we go. Thank you very much to everybody. This is a huge presentation with an awful lot of details. So I just wanted to double check that our current graduation rate is 89.7%, and that's a 4-year graduation rate?
The last report card that we have had that as the 4-year, correct, 89.6.
And our 5-year graduation rate is?
95. Oh, our 5-year rate, I don't have those numbers right at me, I'm sorry. But I know that's over, it's like 94, something like that.
Ish, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So we don't have a 5-year graduation rate in the 2025 targets. If our 4-year rate goes up to 95, is it safe to assume we can get everybody? Sorry.
It's pretty safe that we'll be close to, no, there's always some students who, it can be difficult to locate. Usually that's what happens for students who struggle to graduate, just because it's hard for us for a couple students to find them. But we should be very close to 100% if we get to 95.
If we can, right, if
Yeah.
we can find
When we
everybody.
get to 95, yeah.
Okay, we're setting some very high goals here, which is good, but I also want to make sure we can meet them, right? So,
Right.
hence the monitoring. Okay, that was my only big question. Does anybody else have any thoughts?
I'd like to make some statements. First of all, thank you for putting this together. I absolutely love the fact that there are clear targets and that they're measurable. That is something that I have been asking for since I've been on the board. And I think you've nailed it as far as, making sure that these are things that we can look at, we can measure. And I love the way that you want to be communicating them via, a website, regular updates. I think that's terrific. I did have a note, and I got to find it now, on when we were talking about, and I wish these pages were numbered, that would have helped me, but hang on. It was on, when we were talking about assessments. Here it is. So when we were talking on, it was goal 1, action steps, and it was number 8, adjust the assessments and assessment cycle to better align with student needs. My only comment on that is I hope this means that we may be evaluating assessments and eliminating any that are not absolutely necessary and meaningful. So basically, if we're doing an assessment, what's the actionable outcome that comes from it? Because I worry about how much time our students spend in assessments, and that takes away from, instructional time. So I want to make sure that that's something that we're looking at.
Okay.
And then I did have one other note. Hang on while I find it. It was a note on, but overall, I think that this is fantastic, and I'm really excited that we're talking about things that are real student achievement, because that is something that, that's what our district needs to be all about, is making sure that we're improving student achievement. The last thing that, on goal 5, and this is one that was under Mr. Gaynor's, and that is, as we're looking at the strong fiscal position as measured by the 5-year forecast, I really hope that we can get to a point where we can stretch these levy cycles. This 3-year levy cycle is really, really challenging for our community, and I hope that we can get that to 5 years. And I'm really hoping that at some point, if we look at the 5-year forecast in September, that we might be able to make a commitment, or I would ask my colleagues, because that's something I'm really focused on, that I would really, really like to be in a position where we don't have to ask our community for another levy for at least 5 years, and that we get ourselves on a 5-year levy cycle. So that's something that I hope to be seeing in September, and I'd like to raise that issue at our September meeting when we get a look at the 5-year forecast with more of the information from the new state funding formula.
Absolutely. I think that it falls right in line with really the measurement that we're trying to make here. So.
Were you finished?
I'm finished. I just want to thank everyone who worked on this plan. I think it's fantastic, and I am really excited to see it come to fruition.
Did you want to go next? Or second?
Yeah, I appreciate you all for putting this together. I really like the dashboard that we'll be able to, that the dashboard was created, we'll be able to look at that. And then the other thing is the Grow Your Own program through Human Resources. We have we have had the tendency in the past to eat our own. And I'm glad to see that this program, we were funded, and this program will continue. And I hope that's something that we will continue to do and to, because we have very talented staff right within, and I hope we continue to do that. That's it.
Thank you. So, first of all, thank you to everybody. It's as I look through the participants in this amazing committee, I see people who are no longer in our schools. Zakia Bergen being one, Caroline Imka being another. And these are just such incredibly great names that it warms my heart to be reminded of them. As we move forward, I'm sure that we've got folks stepping into those seats, and it would be nice to make sure that they're included in the record. I wanted to point out, as we've sort of alluded to it, first of all, the measurements that matter this is precisely what we've been looking for. I think a really defined target, and that's fantastic. It would be helpful for me in terms of valuing the information and understanding more fully the information. I'd love to know our starting point for each one of those measures, like where we are today. That would be a big help. I'm thrilled that cybersecurity is being elevated in this strategic plan because it is an incredibly important focus for us. We know that it's happening we, the people on this stage, know that it's happening, but I think it's important that the community, that our students, our staff, and our community knows that it's a high priority to us as well. There have been some very high-profile breaches recently, and so it's just on people's mind. I'm thrilled to see it included explicitly in our strategic plan. I like that we have goals around exposing our kids to AP, CTE, and what's the third? It's
CCP,
thank you, CCP.
too many acronyms.
Yes. However, I wish that we could find a measure of, because we're measuring students exposed, we're not measuring student success. So for instance, students in AP courses are when they take the test, it would be good to know are our students, and to include in our measurements that matter, success in those AP courses, success in the CTE courses, success in the College Credit Plus courses.
I think we do have.
Do we?
We have it in AP under Goal 1 measures that matter, and we have it in CTE, but we don't have it in College Credit Plus, so we can add that piece.
That'd be great. And then I just want to second what Jody said about tests. And I think that this is something that we can really work with our professional teaching staff on, which is, if you allow you to twist a term, what are the measurements that matter to them, to their work? Because I sometimes feel as if there are measurements, there's tests that are being thrust upon our teaching staff that they're a little wary of the value. So I think that that's an important conversation for us to continue talking about, and perhaps it's that they're not aware of the value, that there is value, but they're not aware of it. With OTES 2.0, that becomes very, very important. For those who aren't familiar, OTES stands for Ohio Teacher Evaluation System. So the umbrella under which, or the system that Ohio's teachers are evaluated is incredibly onerous, I would say. It is a burden on everyone involved. And 2.0, the new one, which is launching this year, is data rich. They're insisting on new goals around what they're calling, highly, there's a term for the data anyway. So it all comes back to the tests. And then the final thing that I want to say is the 5-year levy cycle, I think, is something that we all really want to kind of plant a stake around. So I'm eager for us to have that conversation in the near future as well.
I have one question about measures that matter for goal 2. It says here the before last bullet shows a 25% decrease in the achievement gap in core classes. I'm assuming that that's a cumulative 25% decrease over the course of the
5
strategic
years.
plan.
Correct.
It's not an annual decrease.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And if we do it in fits and starts, as opposed to a regular 5% every year, that's fine too, so long as we get to that goal.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to add my 2 cents to the stretching the levy cycle, Mr. Gaynor. If you could think on that and bring us back at our next meeting in September, what your thoughts are about actually achieving that, because I think that's very important to the community.
Absolutely.
And speaking about our next meeting in September, if I could just have a tiny aside, we are moving that meeting from the regular Tuesday night to Wednesday night because in the Jewish diaspora, there are many holidays that are celebrated 2 nights or 2 days rather than 1 day because of the uncertainty of whether you had the right date in Israel compared to where one lived in the diaspora. So Rosh Hashanah is a 1-day holiday, except that the second night is also important. So we're staying away from that by moving our meeting to Wednesday.
So we're moving our meeting from the 7th to the 8th?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So can I move to the ESSER?
I think so.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So next I wanted to take some time to share information about the process that we've engaged in ESSER planning, the feedback that we've received, and some of our initial plans that we'll be submitting in the application for these federal funds. So as I share my screen again. So I just first wanted to start with a little bit of feedback on what ESSER is. I'm not going to read all the information on these slides, but this is for just people's background information. ESSER 3 is also known as the American Rescue Plan. It is the 3rd disbursement of federal funds that has been provided to schools in order to address challenges surrounding the pandemic. So that's everything from learning loss from students, strategies to help safely reopening school, and strategies and interventions to support the social emotional learning needs of students in particular. Our district is going to receive $17.5 million in ESSER funds. Those funds, and this is very important to note because these caveats are very important, need to be expended by September of 2024. And so as you consider how we're going to use these funds, what we'll need to know is come September 2024, some of the things that we fund, we won't necessarily be able to continue to fund because we won't have that continued infusion of federal funds. So I want to just take a step back and talk a bit about the ESSER planning process. And for our district, there's also been a larger context of, fiscal planning just in general. We know it's been a challenging year. And as we ended the school year and went into June, we started to look at some preliminary academic data that we were seeing in our schools. So if you recall, in the work session that we had, I believe that was in June, we looked at some preliminary NWEA data. Later, late June, early July, we received our preliminary OST test data as well. Also in the summer, we were also trying to get a final decision from the state on what our funding would look like. So we certainly didn't want to rush and start making decisions on ESSER funding when we had multiple unknowns, both the academic needs and also the state funding, and also the contours of the state funding, getting some clarity on some things. And quite frankly, we're still waiting on clarity on some state funding things that come out of fair school funding. But still, we wanted to start collecting feedback on what the needs of our students were going to be, because with or without, the federal funding, we knew that this is something that we would have to address. So we did administer a survey in June from stakeholders to get feedback on what they thought the needs would be for next year and even beyond. What we heard from parents, from teachers, from staff, pretty consistently is there were concerns around the academic needs for students. So tutoring came up, SEL supports came up, and really wanting in-personal extracurricular activities is something in particular that our parents really mentioned in their feedback, and I'll show you some slides shortly. We also in our planning process reviewed preliminary academic data, so we looked at the NWA assessments, we looked at the OST assessments. We've been monitoring our attendance all year. We've looked at chronic absenteeism. We looked at grades. Climate and discipline supports, since we had such unique educational models, the data was very different last year, but we were still looking at those trends, over time as well. I can tell you from looking at those preliminary data that we have had significant academic, I like to call it instructional loss, because it's really lost instructional time due to the pandemic. We see that instructional loss in reading performance, math performance, and we see significant challenges with chronic absenteeism, which really, ballooned across the country really last year as we were developing new models and different ways students were coming back to school. Also during the summer, we engaged in the One Needs assessment process. So there's a building leadership retreat. This retreat is held every year where the administrators come together and start to provide feedback for the CCIP process. So they take the work from their building leadership teams, from their labs, and they look at the data to use that to identify some big focus areas. So not surprising, attendance jumps out. Anyone who looks at attendance, it jumps right out to them. Again, academic instructional loss for both reading and math, and then a real need to focus on special populations in terms of academic performance. So those are our priority groups, our English language learners, our students with disabilities. We still see very big gaps between our white students and our African American students, white students and multiracial students. And so those pieces also jumped out. And then as teachers started to return for different professional development, we did have, each of our building teams has a building leadership team that's composed of teachers, it's composed of administrators, there's counselors on those teams, social workers on those teams. They also did the same thing, looked at the data, shared their own experience, and started to build out their building leadership action plans aligned to that. We specifically asked each building team to share the needs that they have in those building level action plans that they will request ESSER funds for support. That really speaks to the need to differentiate when you approach this process. You don't want to just give everybody everything. Buildings are different, they have different needs. And also those building leadership teams have different things that are really important to them, and we want to make sure that we're supporting them as they're building out their plans as well. We also collected feedback from PTA leadership. So even though they haven't officially engaged, the members of the group that were able to come together and kind of share what they're feeling, what they see the needs are as we come back, and how we should think about using our ESSER planning to address those needs. So from the PTA leadership team, they definitely mentioned really wanting us to investigate air conditioning for those buildings that don't have that. We also heard that from teachers and also administrators. They also spoke around the need to make sure that there's adequate mental health and social emotional support for students. They spoke to they are enthusiastically looking forward to lots more extracurricular activities this year, but they also specifically advised me to make sure for our Tiger Virtual Academy that those students who are choosing those families who are choosing for their students to be educated that way have access to extracurricular activities so that they can stay connected to their school communities. And I really appreciate that feedback because it wasn't something that was necessarily top of mind of all the things we were planning. And then finally, we administered a stakeholder survey and just recently so that we could hear from anyone who may have missed the initial survey or or had something else, some other ideas that they really wanted to make sure that we received. And so we started some of the things that we've seen, and I'll share more data. Again, this discussion about air conditioning. We've heard requests for additional teachers. We've seen requests for social emotional learning supports. Some of the similar things, extracurricular activities as well, tutoring as well. So one thing that you can see, just as we look at these different ways that we receive feedback and the different groups we receive feedback from, people are pretty much on the same page in terms of the needs. So we didn't see anything that one group mentioned that another group didn't mention. So we're very aligned there. So just to kind of frame the ESSER plan or the ESSER 3 plan, there are 3 areas really that when we are submitting the application, and I just put the questions here just so everyone could see the questions that we're answering. So they're looking at how districts are academically supporting students. They're looking at the social emotional learning supports for students, but especially those students in special populations. They're also looking to see how districts are addressing and supporting a safe school opening in their ESSER 3 plan. And so these next set of slides, I just kind of want to point out some of the feedback that we received both in the June survey and also in the August survey. You'll see some similarities there. So this question asks, what do you feel students will need next year in order to be successful? Tutoring really jumps out. This is amongst our teaching staff, tutoring, and then the next area is social emotional learning. And then you'll see kind of in-person social events and extracurricular activities are tied. Adult mentoring have lower percentages there, and then at-home learning resources about 40%. So here what we're hearing from our teaching staff is we know for sure we need our kids in school 5 days a week, parent-family support, and then consistency in student expectations is going to be key, especially as we transition all of our students back. For our non-certified staff, again, you'll see some similarities. So again, tutoring jumps out. Social emotional learning needs is number 2 as well. So it kind of follows a similar pattern as our certified staff. And then you'll see some of the write-in answers, parental involvement and support. And again, really want to make sure we have clear academic and behavioral expectations as students return. Our families from the end of the year surveys, their biggest ask was around, as I mentioned, extracurricular activities and in-person activities. And so this is really connecting to knowing how much their kids really miss these experiences. Their top academic intervention was tutoring as well. And you'll see some of their write-in answers. Again, five days a week in school, support for students that are on IEPs, and really just knowing that, all of us, but students in particular, are going to need that kindness, empathy, and love after coming off a really, really tough year. So that's what we heard from our families in June. So when we go to August, and this is probably as of noon, we have about 243 responses. And I can tell you one thing we've learned in administering surveys is the trends don't really tend to change that much as more and more people do complete the surveys. And so here you'll see who we heard from. We still have this survey open, so if there are people who want to share their feedback, they can continue to do that. And here we asked the biggest challenges that we're going to face in terms of accelerating student learning based off last year. So biggest concern is social emotional concerns. Again, really concerned around how students who have essentially been not consistently engaged for a year and a half, how do we make sure they are adequately supported? And then the second, not too far behind, is concerns around academic loss. So some write-in answers, again, stress and fear associated with the pandemic. And then really wanting to make sure we maintain safety protocols in the pandemic. And I have read each of the comments that parents submitted or staff submitted or students submitted on that survey, and that does consistently come up. It's been interesting because, you know, some of the parents and teachers have shared, well, let's not frame this as learning loss because we don't want to go from a deficit-based model, and I agree with that. So we really want to think about it from we got to get more time with kids because we lost a lot of time. And so how do we make sure that we're maximizing that time instructionally? And so this next question in the August survey asked about what should we prioritize in order to meet the needs of students. So connected to social emotional learning, you see mental health jumps out with the highest number of responses. That's followed by more time to accelerate learning, so really thinking about how we add more time or better use our time within the day to provide students what they need. Third area is facility supports. And then from there you see family engagement. You'll see the other areas too. So even preschool and pre-K resources, and I always know that there's not necessarily a lot of preschool families, so I have to always, know that this might be what the preschool families are really saying, but they don't have as large of a group. But we know it's a big concern, especially as it relates to getting to 100% of our third graders reading at grade level. Those children right now may not even be born, right? So we know that we got to make sure that birth to 12 pipeline is very intentional for us. And then the top challenges, again, kind of the same, you see the same theme, social emotional concerns. And then a concern, some of the write-in answers note concerns around the performance of our students who are English learners. And we saw interesting data for that group in the NWEA as well. And so for all of our special populations, really focused support for them. So again, social emotional academics really, really jump out. So here I want to take everyone through this slide. And before going through it, one thing I have really been very intentional about in discussing ESSER is making people really clear on the fact that this is an evolving process. So it's it's 3 years. We're not going to put in stone how we're going to spend money for the next 3 years right now. First of all, we'll want to know, we're going to learn a lot when students start coming back in person next year. And we know we're going to need to make some adjustments as we learn the needs as we're all experiencing them. So some of these interventions are things that we have already started to implement, like Tiger Camp, that's summer extended learning. But these are the big, broad areas where we know for sure we're going to have these pieces in our application. And again, if you recall, the feedback from our stakeholders, these do align. So academic interventions. We will be proposing to use those funds for Tiger Camp, for additional teachers in our buildings, for tutoring, for student success coaches at our middle school and high school, for a 10th grade seminar teacher, and I can talk specifically about that. We know our 9th grade students really suffered with their grades last year. We do have students that are off track academically, so we've added a 10th grade seminar class so students have more academic support to help them do some catch up from 9th grade and stay successful in 10th grade. And then technology to support academics. We now know how important it is to have, functioning, high-quality, one-to-one devices for our students. Key intervention that will continue. On the social emotional learning side for intervention supports, and again, very big area of requests from all of our stakeholder groups, we'll continue to have our social emotional learning, PBIS, and climate supports. Many of our schools ask for very specific things to help them with their positive behavior intervention system plans, and we'll be providing those supports to them. We've heard from parents, we've heard from teachers that we need additional social workers. We agree. And so we will, you'll see that also in our ESSER plan. In terms of mentoring, mentoring is something we actually have been exploring even prior to the district, just because we've had teachers who really started some great models and we wanted to replicate that across the district. And now's a really good time to set that structure up to provide another support for students, again, connected to SEL. For transition supports, really looking closely at students as they go from those key grade levels. Each school has a transition plan. There's some costs associated with that. Anything from teacher planning time to student materials, you'll see that in the plan. Extracurricular activities and clubs as well. Now, we also have these things in our own budget as well, so we'll definitely continue to have those supports in place because they are key. Third big area is around operations. We've talked quite a bit about our safety mitigation strategies. We'll continue all of those pieces, and ESSER does allow you to pay for those, for the materials associated with keeping the district safe with those funds. We have begun investigating the air conditioning and how we could implement that in our classrooms that don't have those, or schools that don't have those. This is not, one thing I just want to manage expectations, not overnight. We can't get air conditionings, in a week or 2 weeks or in a month. George Petcack has been in conversation with some vendors, and we've looked at some portable units. We have to wait to get back information from contractors on bids and what that would mean. One parent, and I love this idea, mentioned, well, can we get the portable air conditioners and maybe just have some that we just take from school to school? Is that something that's viable? Well, even that very device, I believe that, we can't even begin to start thinking about even getting access to it until January, because there's such a backlog of requests, really for anything you want to buy any place in the world at this point. But we have investigated that. So we do have some bids that will be coming out, and I know George will be sharing that information, and we have our eye on that. I do want families to know we've heard you, we're looking into it, we're trying to see what is viable. In the interim, we know we tend to get some hot days in August. We'll have a plan for schools. We will have outdoor tenting. We're purchasing additional outdoor tenting, so if we do have some hot days where it's hard to be in the building, we will be able to have those classrooms outside in the shade, in addition to, fans and windows being open. But I do want everyone to know we have really been and will continue to get specific information on what this looks like and how we can do it. And so our next steps for ESSER planning are to continue to receive and process the feedback. So we have teams who are, we're looking at the feedback as it comes in and answering the questions. Our initial plan will have to be submitted by August 20th, and we will have it posted once it's submitted. And we'll continue to make adjustments as well as we see those needs. And then we will regularly report out on the implementation of our ESSER plan. That requirement, I believe, is every 6 months or so, but you guys know we do more than that. So we'll provide much more regular updates of the plan as it develops. So I believe that is my last slide, and so I can now stop for questions or comments.
Thank you, Superintendent Kirby. I'm particularly happy to hear you say that each building has its own priorities and that it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing where we just throw the same thing at everybody, because each building has its own needs, and it makes sense for each leadership team to figure out what works best for them. So that's That's good to hear. Thank you. I don't think I have any other note. Oh, yes, here we go. I had one other note. Kindness, empathy, and love. How incredibly important that is, not only for our students, but for everybody. So I was very struck by that. Thank you for including it.
Liz, thanks for providing this information. There's a couple of things I want to comment on. First of all, in going to a lot of the kindergarten kickoff meetings that have been happening, it's been a great opportunity to talk to teachers and as well as other staff, as well as families. And the one thing that I hear consistently over and over again from teachers is the concern over learning loss or instructional loss and wanting to help get our kids back to where they need to be and having tutoring support and whatever it takes to help our kids. So I love seeing that that is, front and center in the plan. The other thing I want to caution folks is that when we talk about $17.5 million, it sounds like a big number, and it is a big number, but in doing the math, that's about 14%, 14% of our annual budget. So, it's when people think that we're getting this giant ESSER windfall and it's all this money, when you put it in perspective that way, I am concerned about not adding to our overall cost structure and putting things in place that we can't continue to afford once this money's gone. Yes, I do want us to have staff to help with some of these issues, but I don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we have massive layoffs once this money is gone because we can't continue to support it. However, if it's things that helps our kids get to where they need to be, and then we maybe don't need some of this long-term intervention, that would be the ideal state. So I am very concerned about that because I do hear from the community, oh, it's all this money, it's all this money. What are you going to do with all this money? When you put it in perspective, 14% over a couple-year period is, we're going to go through that money fast.
Yeah, correct.
That's my concern.
One thing that just sort of struck me as we're talking about looking into air conditioning, one of the things that we discovered in Chardon is some of our older buildings that are not air conditioned is that we actually did not have the electrical capacity to bring those portable air conditioning units into the building.
Yeah.
So, that's just another thing to sort of just keep in the mix. And so I want to point out, I love the idea of mentoring programs. Where I teach, we have a freshman mentoring program that's been around for a dozen years at least. And seniors apply to be freshman mentors. It is, there's basically one senior mentor for each 4 freshmen. And it is a fantastic program that I'd be happy to provide some information about.
I would love to know that because the link crew at the high school has a mentoring component that I know 2 years ago, Derek was a freshman. They instituted, couldn't do it last year. They want to bring that back, and I know they're, doing some planning around what that could look like, even after the orientation that they're having. So that's good.
It's one of those things that everybody wins because the mentors get some incredible experience, and it's a great opportunity for them to put that on college applications. Any teacher will tell you we learn more from our students than, So, I will definitely get you that information.
Yeah, Liz, I appreciate the survey that went out that allowed you to put this document together. And it was just interesting to see, the learning loss. And that we're going to address that because, that's not only happened in our district, but just around the country. You know, and yeah, and I appreciate you putting this out and to kind of give us a guideline of what's needed when our kids do return. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that the big message that comes out of the data is how important it is that students are in their classrooms with their teachers
Yes.
every day. It's clear.
Yep.
I don't care where you go.
Yeah.
That's a clear message. So we're excited to get back on track. That's going to make a big difference.
Yeah.
You know, just as a point of order, I think it's important also that as we think about this, you know, we've got staff who've been deeply affected by the pandemic as well.
Yeah.
And so as we think about these programmatic issues, I think it's important to keep them in our minds as well in terms of supports for them.
Mm-hmm. Correct. I agree. Okay. All right.
Anybody else have any comments or thoughts about this?
Thank you for all the information this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we are ready to adjourn. May I have a motion?
I motion we adjourn.
I second that.
Mr. Gaynor, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. Wright,
Yes.
Mr. Hines,
Yes.
Ms. Serini,
Yes.
Ms. Lewis.
Yes. And we are adjourned, and I'm going to remember my gavel now. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Yes.
Good night.